Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining me on 21st Century Native Leaders. My name is Peter Desert III, and I am here with Danielle Romero. Danielle is the founder of There Is a Cloud. Danielle worked on the Navajo reservation in Pueblo Pintado. So prior to getting on, we were talking about this because I taught out in Tohatchee at Chishka Community School, and we used to play Pueblo Pintado. So those of you geographically, that's located between Crown Point, New Mexico, and Cuba, New Mexico. So it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, right?
Yeah, I liked it, but it was nowhere.
Absolutely, but I think that remoteness is pretty cool. So Danielle did teach out here with with our Navajo kids and students that lived on the Navajo Nation. She ended up moving back east to Vanderbilt University. So very similar journey to my wife and I. As you can see back there, we have Penn State. So for grad school, we moved back east to Penn State to get our master's in leadership. And then actually her thesis was multicultural mathematics. What a practical methods for incorporating diverse understandings of measurement in the contemporary elementary classroom. Wow. We'll get we'll talk a little bit about that, okay? Because
Yeah.
I actually used to be a math teacher, so I have a lot of good input, and you'll want to hear about that as well. And let's see. Right, currently, she's actually created a nonprofit. There is a cloud, and we'll talk a little bit about that endeavor that she has. Okay, so welcome, Danielle.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, talk with me a little bit about your tribal affiliation, where you come from, where you're raised.
Sure. One of the things I really enjoy about your podcast is the depth of connection and knowledge that your interviewees have with their tribes and their families. I think my story is a little sadder and a little different. Um, so my matrilineal line is Chitimacha and Natchitoches, which are tribes in Louisiana. I don't really have a connection to the Chitimacha side, so I usually leave that off. But my great grandmother's family was from the Black Lake community of Camp D, Louisiana. It was named for Chief Camp D, and that's kind of where she was born. She was raised. The family has been there forever. But she ended up marrying a man from New York, and who was not native. And they got married, had children. He moved her back up to New York, and he died shortly after when my grandmother was a little girl. So she was raised by her mother in New York, and the experience that she had, it has affected my mother, has affected me, because as a little girl, my grandmother said that the neighbors were told not to play with them because they were Indian. And you have to, think this is the 1940s in, New York, in an area where we would normally say there's no racism in the North. That was not their experience. When they would go to the grocery store, there would be a lot of like gossip and whispers about her mother, who stood out like a sore thumb. But she would go and ask her mother, and she would say, what do I say to them? And her mother would say, well, don't listen to them. But the reality of what my grandmother was taught was to assimilate. They were taught to not talk where they came from. My great grandmother told them nothing about back home, literally nothing. And there's an anecdote my Grammy told me, which has always stuck out to me, which is that her mother would never go out in the sun. She never, ever wanted to be darker than she was naturally. And so we kind of grew up with this sense of just, we knew we belonged somewhere, but we were so far removed. I was born in New York also. The family just stayed there. And so my journey has been kind of one of piecing things back together, connecting with family down there. And so anything that I know or I learned about the tribe, I've had to fight for. And so I'm always so jealous of your of your interviewees who know where they came from, and they were told to be proud, because that is not my experience.
Right, and I think that's a common experience. I used to live out in Wisconsin, and I think that's a common story with a lot of Native people that are in the Midwest and on the East Coast. So that's not something that's not uncommon. So I think that's part of the process. I think whenever I was away from the Four Corners area, I really learned to connect, or I wanted to know more. Like I valued that culture that I came from. And I think that's kind of sounds like a similar journey. You trying to find your lineage, and that's pretty important.
It is important. I think also what has been really beautiful to me is I feel like even being very distanced from the culture originally and language and all of those things, there has always been something inside of me. I feel like that has been drawing me. So, my whole, you know, everything I have wanted to do, I feel like has pointed in one direction. And so, like you had mentioned, teaching on the Dene Reservation in New Mexico, and my focus in my studies, and so I'm hoping to kind of weave things together the best I can for my children, and I hope that they have a different experience.
That's awesome. I think that's part of the journey as well. So, talk with me about the highlights of your career. Talk with me about your paper that we talked about in the intro.
Yes. So I remember when I was told I could write about anything for my dissertation for my master's. And one of the things that struck me, because I was writing it after having spent time teaching, on the reservation, a lot of my students, most of my students, their first language was not English, and they knew English, but it was not their first language. And what I experienced, because I taught grades 3 through 8, um, was that they also seemed to have a sense of first mathematics, I thought. And it was important to build on that. Thankfully, I had the freedom to do this in the classroom, but to, instead of trying to erase what they had been doing up until that point, to build on it and let that be their guide, and transfer that knowledge into the textbook knowledge that, between you and me, I really feel like is just not as valuable as we're told. So the paper is mostly kind of just hinging on that, and yeah. So I felt like the connection between having a first language and first mathematics is something I saw in my students.
That's awesome. I think that's one thing I've done a presentation I think last month about culturally responsive teaching, and I think whenever you work with students of color, like I said, I taught in Milwaukee inner city, which a lot of our native students were black, Hispanic, we had a couple Asian, and then Cuban. Right, they were very multicultural. But just having that in mind, just like you were saying, students come with tons of knowledge with them, right? And I think that's the important part. But I think one thing is important is like teaching problem solving, right, with mathematics, and that sounds like that's a part of it. Because when I read your title, I was like, oh, that kind of sounds pretty catchy. Uh, so what brought you out to Pueblo Pintado?
So I did Teach for America after college. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the program, but they really tell you they have lots of areas that you can go teach in. Because I wasn't sure if I wanted to teach, um, but I knew I wanted to work on a reservation. So I was either going to go this route, or I was going to go volunteer in Pine Ridge and just work with women for domestic violence, because that's a huge issue there. And I was just kind of open to whatever path opened for me. So the teaching one opened first, and they a lot of people were very surprised at my desire for the placements. I remember it was one of the smallest core. Lots of people went to Miami. Lots of people went to Phoenix. But it was important to me because I am still so distanced from the experience I feel like I should have had, that I thought it would be, I don't know, really wonderful to go and learn. So, I mean, I went to teach, but I went to learn. And it was good. It was eye-opening, though. I will tell you, it was eye-opening. Some of my students, they lived at the schools. It was like they were there during the week, and I drove them home on the weekends, on Friday afternoons. And some of the students, um, I remember the first couple weeks being very surprised where I was dropping them off. They would have me drop them off at the end of a dirt road, and they said, "My auntie's down there. She'll get me." And I'm like, "Are you sure?" And as you know, like many of the students, they lived in hogans with dirt floors, no running water, and they were happy. They were content. They were happy to be there, and they were happy to be with me at school. And it's really humbling experience. I think there's not enough visibility with that.
Absolutely. That's so interesting because I remember that too. I remember coaching basketball and volleyball at Trishkai and driving to Pueblo Pintado or Jones Ranch. I think they call it Chechitka, all the way up to San Asti, Crystal every now and then. But, like you said, in fact, we just drove by there, my family and I, a week ago, and I'm like, oh man, I remember driving back late at night,
Mm.
you know, 11 o'clock at night after we had a game and dropping kids off. And a lot of times the coaches had to have their bus driving license as well because we were the coach and the bus driver. Pretty unique. So I'm actually familiar with Teach for America. Do you ever remember one of the TFA alum, Jessica Shu?
It sounds familiar. It was amazing for how small of a core it was. That I feel like there were so many new people that you were meeting all the time, and the alum that were helping you. So it's not someone I know, but I'm sure I'm connected to her on one of the social media platforms.
Absolutely. So actually, I worked with her in 2006 and 2007 out in Tohatchee. So that's why, like, if you guys were probably there at the same time, because I think she was in Tohatchee until 2009 or 10. So you all might have crossed paths, but she did more than 2 years. So aside from your experience with Teach for America and working with Native Navajo kids out here, so talk with me a little bit more about There Is Cloud, because I know you had shared some info, and I saw on your Instagram page. You're working in Native communities, fundraising, increasing visibility, marketing, and strategy. Talk with me a little bit about how you started There Is a Cloud.
So, by way of just you connect to the community, and then you connect to a community that's connected to that community. And it's like, this huge web. And I started to find out about these organizations that they weren't flashy. They didn't really even have a social media presence. And they were doing either the stuff they were doing was incredible. There was one, and just for the sake of protection for the children and the mothers, I won't say like the location, but there's this home in Arizona. I use like the term home loosely, but really they take in mothers and children who are in domestic violence situations and things like that, and they just pay for everything. They school the children, they do everything. I remember being in contact with the woman who was running it. I believe she was Sioux, but she was in Arizona, and just saying like, "What do you need for the kids?" Like, which I don't even know who to ask. I don't know what to do. And so that was kind of my first foray into this, was getting new clothes for the children, because they had never owned their own things. There was little boys and girls clothes, little girls and boys clothes, and they were happy and they didn't care. But when you see it, you say, this is not a difficult problem to solve. We just need to be the middleman to make the connections and just let people know. So I really there's so many good organizations that are big and they're powerful and they're strong, but I feel like there's a lot of small ones, and those are the ones that tug at my heart.
That's awesome. I think that's one thing that has really come out with the pandemic is a lot of nonprofit organizations around nations that have stepped up to try to provide food, clothing, shelter, some of our basic needs. And it's actually, I did some accounting work for Water Warriors, Zolzani, and helped out a little bit with that organization. But it's pretty powerful that people give up their time and donate their time basically a lot of times and help out communities. So Talk with me about some of the challenges you faced starting there as a cloud.
Yes, so I think the biggest one, you may have been following me, but I tried to do this 3 years ago. We went back to New York temporarily to be near our family, and I tried to do it there. And the red tape in New York was unlike anything I've ever experienced. They required a board of directors to, have a nonprofit, the 501(c)(3). And that was something that I was a little bit on the fence about, just because I feel so strongly about not worrying about seeming like I'm doing things, just making sure that I am doing things. And I feel like sometimes the vision can get lost in the presentation of what you're doing. So when we moved back to Nashville, we had a little bit more freedom to I can just take the reins and go with it. But I think sometimes the bureaucracy, I'm surprised by the bureaucracy and the red tape that really prevents just another obstacle, sometimes. But I think that's a little bit of New York's nature. So
Wow, sounds very complex. So I thought you were going to say, "Oh, funding. Funding was always the hardest thing." But are there a lot of people out there, you know, willing to donate, wanting to donate?
yeah, there are. I think there's just a lot of people who don't know. And I feel like because I didn't grow up in a tribal community, I didn't grow up on the reservation where the family is from. When I speak about things, like friends and acquaintances, they don't know that lots of Native Americans are living in, I believe, the 2004 Gallup poll called it third world conditions. I think there's just this assumption that Native Americans are they're all working at casino, and they're all, there's these things that you come across because you realize that there's not there's still not real conversations happening about what is needed. And I think once people realize that no, not everybody is getting a check in the mail every month for being Native American, but there are needs that people want to help. They just don't know. So
Yeah, that's some pretty unique challenges. And I mean, you think about it though, like, and I think that's why I said earlier that, like, I feel with COVID that kind of opened up because there were a lot of people saying, "Well, how do I help out?" And with the amount of coverage that the Navajo Nation, even though it was impacted far greater than a lot of other communities, there were a lot of people. Like I remember because of the podcast, people would say, "Who can we donate to? Who are some lists?" And I remember one weekend, my wife and I put a list together on a Google Doc, and there was like, gosh, 25 to 30 organizations that we said, here's some good ones, and if you want to donate to some. But I think that's one area. So talk with me about, so for your 501(c), you said about a board of directors, right? And I'm on two boards, nonprofits. One of them is the Navajo Film Festival here. Well, I think it's in Shiprock. Okay, but we haven't really met except for virtually because of the pandemic. Um, but that's part of it, is you have to have a board of director. Talk with me a little bit about that, because I have people sometimes that are saying, "Oh, I don't know how to start a nonprofit." Talk with me about that.
yeah, I think this is one of those things where you just you can't take no for an answer. Because for some reason I feel like the best things that you can want to do in life seem like they're the most difficult. I feel like they should be the easiest to do. The board of directors thing really intimidated me also, because it's one of those things, like, you don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen, you know. Um, but actually, I don't think it's so bad, because, like you're saying, you're on a board, and it's important to have a community. I think doing things on our own is never it's never the most successful route. So I've kind of come a little ways. I was very against it at first because I was just afraid to say no. Like, I don't want, because I feel like everything seems to trend toward how can it look on Instagram and Facebook, and that's just, I don't want that. I don't want that. And I know it's important to kind of to have both, but um yeah, I've come around a little bit on the board of directors stuff, but it's still not my favorite. It's not my favorite setup, but
So kind of challenging to navigate that process. I'm assuming you're the one that picked your board of directors. Am I correct?
Well, in New York, I remember trying to set it up, and I was handed like a stack of papers this big, and I remember saying like, I have no desire to make any money on this. I literally just want to be a middleman to kind of connect people who want to help and people who need help. Um, but that's the legal side's still really not my forte. Um, my dad's an attorney, and he has helped me tremendously with that stuff because it's, the funding is not a thing that turns me off. I feel like you can always raise money, you can always get people excited, you can always share knowledge. But the legal stuff, I feel like it needs surgical precision that I don't that's not one of my gifts. But thankfully there are people that have that, and you need them on your team.
Absolutely. So I think that's one of the areas. I remember the first meeting that we held for the Water Warrior. That was setting like the vision and mission. I think if you have that set and it's strong, like no matter who's there helping out, giving a helping hand, that'll that arrow is always pointed in the right direction. I mean, talk with me about creating that for there is a cloud.
I think I'm still trying to find it, and I think part of that is being open to, you can start things and say I want to go this direction, but then you kind of life brings other things, and I'm not a flexible person by nature. But that's one of the things that I think I want to be more flexible and say, okay, like I envision this, but this is where the real needs are, and being okay kind of shifting to go that route. And I think, like I said, I'm not great at that, but it's something, you also learn as a teacher when you go in and you say, I want to teach a lesson this way. And you can't, you get a few minutes in and you realize, okay, like we cannot go this way. We need to go this way. We need to have the people with us. We can't just go on our own. But I think that's a life lesson, and I haven't quite mastered it yet, but maybe you could speak to that as a fellow teacher.
Absolutely. Well, I think the biggest thing is like you were saying, once you're so a lot of times people that start organizations like this or entrepreneurial people, they have this idea and they know how they want it to run. It's just letting go. I guess it's finding people that have a similar passion and vision to you. Like I think that's part of it. And I know on this board the whole idea was, well, how can we help out? Do you want to help out? And I think that's where a lot of that giving back is important. So talk with me about your role. Like what do you do with, I mean, are you the CEO? Are you like talk with me about that?
So again, I think every answer would be, we're working on that right now. Um, right now, I am wearing all the hats because I used to, so I was a teacher and I did that for a while. And then I started a business here in Nashville where I was making jewelry, and I was doing that full time, and I really enjoyed that. Um, so but I am transitioning to that is on pause or temporarily. I mean, I'm flexible because I want to devote. It's important to me to devote 100% to what I'm doing. I don't want to do three things. Okay, I want to do one thing really well. So right now I'm kind of fleshing that stuff out, and I probably need to pass along some of the responsibility other places. I've heard that. So it's a good reminder to me. But yeah, right now, like I built the website, I do the contact. I'm not great on social media, but I'm on the account. And yeah, so maybe you can give me some tips on how to delegate.
Yeah, that's the hard part. I think, especially if you want it done a certain way, right? And I think that's part of, I guess, letting go and actually building capacity, right? You have this
Yes.
idea because it's your vision, and you get people on your organization or who work with you, and then working together with them so they can see the same vision. But I tell you what, it's always like refocusing. I mean, I'm a high school principal, and every Monday at our morning staff meeting, it's always focusing on the vision and the mission. Remember, here's where we said we were going to be, and I think that's just constantly reminding your crew, my
It's
staff.
such a good reminder. It's a good reminder for me too. I feel like sometimes we do forget, why am I doing this again? And yeah, to keep focused on the big picture. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, you just reminded me of. I try to connect a lot of these conversations to research as well. I think this kind of reminded me of Simon Sinek's book, Start with the Why. I
Mhm.
think, I mean, that's another thing that I constantly do with my staff is reminding them our why. We're starting this school year with a why as well. Why are we doing this? Right? We're doing this for the kids, and I think that's a big important piece for you as the community. So,
Absolutely.
so talk with me about the types of support you provide to communities.
So right now, the biggest thing, like I said, I had a business where I did, I was the maker, I was the marketer, I built the business. I would be the liaison with stores that were purchasing my product, or like things like, or I would show up to the festivals, like I was doing all that stuff. It wasn't super sustainable long term. You have to start parsing things out. Um, but I really enjoy the marketing side, and I think more so the storytelling side. And so I think when I talk about delegating, I'll probably delegate the really boring stuff to other people, um, because what I am really impassioned about is hearing firsthand what's going on the ground, and letting them tell that story and sharing that story, because I feel like you can say there's an organization doing something great, you should support them. But when you hear the stories of people that have been impacted by that organization, how it's changed their life, that's the emotional component that I think is really important. And that's the thing that's what compels me. That's what excites me. So I think, yeah, I think I I think I might have gone off a little bit on your question. Um, you might have to bring me back on track.
Absolutely. Community support. Like, what are you
Yes.
working to?
So I guess I want my biggest thing, you're saying, the children, um, seeing the students, how the students live, the struggles that they had, were so different than the struggles that I saw back in New York. And of course, there's, like, it's hard to compare. There's different kinds of poverty. There's different kinds of things, but they were so unlike anything I had ever experienced firsthand. So when I talk about community support, the kind of things I want to do is I want to make sure that, like, do these children, the children that you're serving in whatever capacity these nonprofits are serving, like, have they ever owned something that was not a hand-me-down before? Like, that's really important to me. For my students, I remember that sometimes they would come into class and they would have something new. It was like it was theirs. Um, and like when I talk about community support, like, I guess that's such a large umbrella thing, and it's hard for me to divorce it from just these small individual stories. And I think that's kind of something that we're working through, how to tell those small stories while still doing this big thing of, like, supporting the community, because it's so big. And like I said, brand new, getting this on the ground. So I think these are things, like, I'm writing down your questions so I can reflect on them and improve.
Absolutely, I think that's part of the process as well as talking through that. And so what is the message you're trying to convey with There Is a Cloud? I mean, what image do you want out there? And you talked about whenever you shared your bio, you talked about visibility and marketing. Like, what is the brand you want to portray?
So the name There Is a Cloud, I think, really encapsulates that. Um, it is from scripture. 'Cause I'm a Christian, and there's this portion of scripture in the Old Testament where a prophet is told in First Kings to, like, that God's going to send rain to this very dry land. And so he keeps looking for rain, looking for rain, looking for rain. He goes 7 times. There's no rain. There's no sign. And then the seventh time, um, it says, scripture said that there was a cloud and it came out of the sea and it was as small as a man's hand. And it grew and it grew and it became this huge storm that ended this dry spell. And it has just always stuck with me, that there is a cloud, and sometimes it's so small, it's the size of a man's hand. Um, and just the importance of small beginnings, small, small, you know, nonprofits, small things that don't seem like they're doing anything, and how powerful they can be, and what they can grow into. And so, like I said, my vision for this is to be working with nonprofits that seem like maybe they're serving 5 children, maybe they're serving 3 families, but not to dismiss something because it's small. And that's just maybe things change down the road, but that's where I am today, and that's kind of what I'm hoping to do. So
Nice. I think that I like that story and the connection. I think part of it is because like you were saying, start small and organically, and then grow, and next thing you know, it's taking care of a lot of people. And I think that's an important story, and it's definitely a story you can pitch to someone. And I guess I like that. So, like, what type of work have you done recently, or that you're planning to do in the next year or so?
you mean as far as like who we're working with through the nonprofit?
Yes.
Um, thank you. So like I said, I'm open to working with anyone who's working with Native communities on and off the reservation. I think like off the reservation is an important thing also. I'm sure like there's this whole other sector of like these urban natives that I feel like, they have their own struggles, and it's different. Um, but we mostly I have been working with, and it's kind of like the things that just fall into your lap, um, homes that are working with children, and kind of like I don't know. It's like the thing is, I want to put this stuff on the site, but a lot of the people we end up working with, we have to be really careful, because when it is domestic situations, like you're not allowed to say, they're at this place, or where is this place exactly located. So it's kind of been a little bit of a hurdle that I've run into that I didn't expect. And I really enjoy working with those groups, but it's hard to also be like, here's what we're working on, because these are people that you're trying to, they're in a precarious situation. Um, so I don't know if you have any advice for that. I think it's probably something that's really familiar, um, you know, but yeah, so that's I think a thing we're kind of, I want to share the stories, but some of the stories you can't share right now, and that's kind of in a difficult spot.
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing that's important. I think that's why I saw your page, your Facebook, your Instagram page as well. And I feel there's a lot of networking that goes on, and that's why, like I said, I met with a a lady from, she's actually out of Albuquerque, but she said that she works for the Gates Foundation and looking for local or other organizations, nonprofits that need help, helping with funding and stuff like that. So then, there's definitely, now I feel like I connect people together, or you should reach out to so and so. They're starting this up. So just because of the podcast, I've met quite a few people, and can direct people. So that'll be good. So talk with me a little bit more about how did you? I mean, I'm assuming you learned this from your jewelry business, but talk with me about how important that marketing is with the nonprofit.
Yeah, it's amazing. Um, I feel like this is not something special to Native communities, although storytelling is so important. But telling a story is so much more important than telling somebody why they need to do something. Letting them hear the story and kind of process why something is important to them. I feel like good marketing is storytelling. When I had my business, where I was making jewelry and other things, My products always had a story that went along with them. And I would say like, I spent maybe 25% of the time making the product. 75% of the effort was going into telling the story of the product, like, and in bringing that out. And it's amazing. You're not really selling the product, you're selling the story. And so to me, marketing is, um, in a less nefarious way, but you're selling the story, and people love a good story. So
That's so true. I think that's part of it. I think that marketing that you talk about is finding those stories to tell, but kind of tough if some of those stories can't be shared yet. So talk with me about how people can donate to There Is a Cloud.
yeah, right now they could just contact me through the website. 'Cause I'm trying to keep everything, going through there, so it's just nice and clean. But I have a PayPal that I can pass along. Um, but right now, like, we are just kind of doing it case by case. So when I have a need, so if we have an organization that has a need, I kind of try to network people who are interested in supporting that organization. Another thing that we are working on right now, I feel like it's kind of a marriage between my entrepreneurial side, and this is helping organizations kind of, not just give them a fish and feed them for a day, but teach them how to fish. How can they kind of keep the organization going? And that's the strategy side of learning how to market themselves, which I think is really important, and learning how to do things even as simply as, sell t-shirts with your logo on it, sell hats with your logo on it, and do things like that that bring visibility to what you're doing. And they bring in money. They're easy. They can be drop shipped. You don't have to even touch the product. And that's really important to me too, because I want to help, but I want to help in ways where now they feel like they can do this on their own. And I feel like that's really important.
Nice. I like that. I like that drop shipping idea. That's a pretty quick way to get money and fast way, since you have the whole World Wide Web. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool. So I'll definitely send me a link to the PayPal info, and I can put that in the show notes as well. So what about how can people contact you so that they can reach out to you?
Yeah, so if they go to thereisacloud.org, there's a contact form on there that's easy. Um, and I'm on Instagram. I think it's like there is a cloud, but it's like there's periods in between the words, and they can go on there also. But the website, like I said, it has kind of like our vision, a way to contact, and yeah, all of the messages, I know it's wrong, but they all go directly to me because I'm doing those too. So if you go through the form, you're emailing me. So.
That's right. Yeah, I think you said earlier that you do everything. You're the marketing director. You're the CEO, the CFO. So that's how it is when you start, right? And I do all this stuff for the podcast too. So, and let's see, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I just so appreciate you having me on, and honestly giving visibility to my story, because I feel like this is actually the first time I've ever shared that publicly. And so it's very meaningful to me to kind of own it and put it out there. And yeah, so that's very meaningful to me. So I appreciate that, Peter. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. So take a look at Danielle's page. There is acloud.org, correct?
Yes.
Also, check out on Instagram. There is a cloud. Actually, I think I was just looking at it too. So I believe it is, just so I don't get it wrong. There, like you were saying, there dot is dot a. Actually, you could just put it there as a cloud and it popped up. So that's on Instagram. Yeah, it was pretty quick. But anyway, I appreciate you taking time to interview and share your story, and definitely create some visibility out there in Indian country. And The podcast is heard in, I think, 300. Last I checked, 329 countries, so around the world.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I think 70% of them are in the Four Corners area. So majority of the listeners in this area. So, but other than that, we're all set, and hope you have a good rest of your day. And if you could send me a image for the background of the podcast, that'd be good.